questions. You will all be leaving, but the panelists will be moving to the principal's conference room to do the deliberations. Presenter will present, time for questions, and then everyone will need to leave. I'd like you to welcome Will Greene.
Good morning, folks. Thank you all for coming. I'm Will Greene, like she said, there's the mic. And I'm going to talk to you today about my Senior X, the Acadia time-lapse project. To begin, I'd like to speak a little bit about my beginnings and how I came to be who I am today. My parents raised me in the park. My father, Craig, was a botany professor at COA, and my mom adores the island and the park. And I was lucky enough to inherit their passion and curiosity for the natural world, a trait that really defines who I am today. My dad was also an adept photographer, and although he passed away before I could become a photographer myself, my interests and passions have followed in his footsteps. When I started thinking about a senior exhibition project in my sophomore year, I knew I wanted to put those interests to good use and do a project that allowed me to be out and about on MDI while I worked. My initial idea was a project with over the 100 miles of abandoned trails in the park, but this didn't pan out and I needed a new idea in the fall of 2014. In early October, I was talking to Mr. Lurvy about my pipe dream of creating a professional time-lapse quality video, and he suggested that maybe I could try it for my Senior X. I immediately jumped at the idea, killing two birds with one stone, and I had some decent photography experience and had dabbled a bit in making time lapses, so I felt ready to undertake a really massive project that would combine all of my interests, being outdoors, exploring in the park, and photography. And with that in mind, I hatched my plan. But first, let me take a moment to explain a little bit about what time-lapse is. Time-lapse is really just a video technique. What happens is you take photos at a regular interval and string them together on a computer after the fact. The result is a video where time is sped up, allowing you to see things that are normally too slow to watch, like clouds forming and moving, the sun rising or setting, tides, or the passage of stars across the night sky. What I wanted to do was shoot a series of these time-lapse sequences and compile them into a video set to music. Some professional photographers did a similar project in Yosemite in 2011 and a sequel to it in 2013. Their videos are unbelievably stunning, and they served as one of the primary inspirations for my project. My goal was to create a professional quality video like Yosemite HD and Yosemite HD2 and share it with the intention of inspiring others to get out into the park and work to preserve it. And this brings me to my essential question: how can I use my photography skills and love of MDI to contribute to the celebration and preservation of Acadia National Park? I thought I would be able to use my previous skills in addition to a whole slew of new ones to create a very special product. My idea was to do as much as possible before my presentation today, which I have done, and present something then, and then continue on through the summer so that I could capture all 4 seasons because I started in the fall. Going into the project, I had some decent photography experience. These are photos that I took before the project started. I'd even learned some techniques for long exposure night sky photography and had dabbled a little bit in time-lapse, doing some short promotional videos for the Acadian Night Sky Festival, working with Mr. Lurvy. I had more knowledge going into this senior exhibition than is typical, but I didn't think new learning would be a problem because I was trying to create a professional quality product instead of just learning a new skill or something like that. And I had a lot to learn. Speaking of having a lot to learn, this is the very first time-lapse I ever shot in the fall of 2012 with my newly gotten GoPro camera. And as you can see, it's quite thrilling. There's a lot going on there. But I've improved a lot since then. And as I began, I assessed what I had and what I needed for equipment. Starting the project, I had a nice amateur setup, a DSLR, but to make something really professional, I knew that I needed a full-frame, pro-level DSLR, a time-lapse slider to add motion to the shots, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, and a super wide-angle lens. It quickly became apparent that I would need to get some serious funding because none of these toys are very cheap. I first reached out to the Chamber of Commerce, and within 24 hours, they had secured $1,000 for me to purchase a slider, which I was blown away by. That was very incredible. My mother and grandfather also helped me to purchase the camera that I needed for my birthday, which was conveniently in late October. I also received an EEF grant to purchase the lens and this program called LR time-lapse that I use to put together my videos. This didn't all arrive overnight though, so I got out with what I had immediately. And this was the very first time-lapse I shot for the project on the morning of October 7th at the Precipice Cliff. And I was pretty pleased. I thought it turned out well, and it really inspired me to keep going. And I continued with the project through the fall and the winter, and in the spring, I began working with my mentor, Ned Johnston. Ned was a professional documentary videographer who worked for National Geographic. He also has tons of photography experience, and because I was working with photos and videos, it made a lot of sense because he had some experience in both. He was kind enough to work with me, and we worked together on all three aspects of the time-lapse process, which I'll talk about next. I wasn't really sure how this mentoring would go because I wasn't just looking to learn a skill. I was looking to advance from a skill level to a professional, almost, level. But his advice was extremely helpful. This project required an insane amount of technical learning and experience, and I could go on about the process that I used all day long, but instead I'm just going to give a brief, relatively non-technical description of how I physically made this project happen. The first step in every sequence is deciding where to go and where to shoot, and what to shoot while I was there, Then, once I decided, I would gather my gear, as shown over there, and get to my location, whether by bike, by car, by skis, or by foot. I'd set everything up, as you can see there, and select an appropriate interval between shots, which would determine how fast motion would occur in the final video. Ned came along on this particular shot here and took this photograph and helped me set up the time-lapse, giving me suggestions for composition and slider use. My shots for the project ranged anywhere from 10 minutes to 5 hours long. For this time, the camera worked predominantly automatically. Sometimes I set up my old DSLR or my neighbor's DSLR to do another time-lapse or even 2 more time-lapses occasionally nearby. Other times I sat in my car and read or did physics homework for Mr. DeCourty. One time I even sat up on top of Cadillac, backcountry skied partway down, and hiked back up for the finished product. Much of the time, however, I just sat and took in the beauty of my surroundings in the park that I love. I'm going to talk a little bit about the slider, which you can see over there. It's a 6-foot-long piece of track, and what happens is while the camera is shooting, it's on a dolly that moves a set distance really short, like 1/4 of an inch, between shots. So for the duration of the sequence, it travels the length of the track, and the sequence is usually about 400 images. This allows for more interesting shots because it adds motion and depth. Since the foreground moves faster than the background, it allows you to see around objects, which you'll be able to see a little bit later, and it's very cool. The whole setup is controlled by the MX3 controller, which is the brains of the setup, and it syncs the camera shutter release with the movement of the dolly. And this took some real learning to figure out. It was a pretty sharp learning curve. And I used the Dynamic Perceptions manual for it, and several online tutorials from the company as well to master the technique. Here are 2 similar shots, one with and one without the slider. As you can see, the bottom one is much more interesting, even though nothing more interesting is going on in the scene. The motion of the slider adds everything. After I got home from shooting an individual time-lapse, it was time to process it. I used 2 programs in conjunction with each other, Adobe Lightroom 5 to organize and edit the individual shots, and LR time-lapse to sync those edits smoothly across the whole sequence and to compile the images into a video. I learned Lightroom from Scott Kelby's book, Adobe Lightroom for Digital Photographers, and I learned LR time-lapse from the creator Gunther Wegner's tutorials on his website. The most basic workflow that I used started by importing the sequence into Lightroom, initializing it and preparing it for editing in LR time-lapse, going back to Lightroom to edit keyframes, the first and the last image in the sequence, and Ned helped me a lot with that, making sure the edits looked good. Then I'd go back to LR time-lapse to transition those edits smoothly across the whole sequence, go back to Lightroom to export it, and then finally render the video, the final video, in LR time-lapse. And keep in mind that that's the simplest procedure that I used. Some more complex ones used even more switches back and forth. Here's a little time-lapse of me editing a time-lapse, just to show you what that process looks like. There it's rendering. And there's the final video. I didn't end up using this one because it had some technical glitches. But that's what it looks like editing a time-lapse. This one took me about 10 minutes, but more complex ones could take up to an hour. Then the most complex one of those editing sequences that I used is called the Holy Grail workflow. You use it when you have significant changes in light in the scene, as in a sunset or a sunrise, and you change camera settings in the field by hand in order to keep the exposure relatively constant. And then you use LR time-lapse to correct for those changes on a computer. This was the hardest thing to learn, and I still am far from mastering it. And again, I used LR time-lapse creator Gunther Wegner's tutorials to figure this out. Here is a Holy Grail shot before and after editing. And you can see in the top one, it's very jumpy because I'm changing settings as I go. But in the bottom one, it's smooth and professional looking. The final step in processing a time-lapse is putting the final video together in a program called Final Cut Pro. Fortunately, I'd had prior experience with this program, and it was enough to get me by. I picked out the best shots and worked with Ned to put these in a desirable order. The missing link, however, was the music. And I knew music would be key, but I didn't want to deal with any copyright infringement stuff, so I asked my friend Jack Sasner to write me a piece. He did, and it rocks. Thank you, Jack. In the final step of the editing process, once I had the shots selected, I sped up or slowed down each one to fit the transitions in the music. This is the user interface that I used in Final Cut while editing. That's the editing process. But for this project, I really wanted to include night sky time lapses in the project because Acadia's night skies are incredible, arguably the best on the East Coast, the best in the darkest. It's a lesser known part of what makes our park so incredibly special. But in order to do this night sky photography time lapse, I needed to get permission from the park to stay overnight. I worked with them and drafted a special use permit, which was approved a few weeks ago, and I now keep in my backpack at all times, in case anybody questions me. I've only gone out a few times all night, but it's been an awe-inspiring experience to be out there alone all night, and I will be doing a lot more of it this summer. All in all, my project went very smoothly, and I was really happy because I didn't run into any debilitating roadblocks. But there were several technical issues that I ran into, some of which were fixable and some of them not. Time constraints were probably the most significant challenge because I have a lot of interests and I'm a very busy person, so I had to fit it into my free time. Also, the seasons posed a problem. The extreme winter we had this year made for a very late spring, and I've only been able to capture beautiful spring shots in the past couple of weeks when the leaves came out. Another issue I encountered was human error, when I just forgot to do something. In this particular shot, I forgot to change the camera settings to RAW in order to get more higher quality video. So even with LR time-lapse correction, it's still jumpy and it doesn't look good. There's nothing I can do to fix that. Another problem that I ran into that is fixable, fortunately, is aperture flicker, where the aperture of the camera changes minutely between shots, causing the exposure to flicker. As you can see in the top one, it's flickering, and in the bottom, it's smooth, because LR time-lapse can correct for it. So the bottom is the finished product, and the top one is the messed up part. And the most unexpected issue I ran into was black flies swarming my camera. Needless to say, it ruined this shot. I didn't see that coming. But what am I going to do? I couldn't use it. Despite the issues I ran into, I'm very happy with how the project turned out. And here are some statistics about my project. I started this project 227 days ago and have shot over 21,000 images since. That equates to about one photo every 15 minutes. I've shot 35 hours of time-lapse, which has been sped up into 5 minutes for my final project. I shot over 300 gigabytes of data, filling up 1.5 hard drives, and I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours, both in the editing and the shooting process. I'd like to revisit my essential question now, and the simple answer to it is that I've been able to create a fairly professional time-lapse film that you'll see in a moment, and I will be able to share with my community and the world, as it will go on the internet once I'm finally done with it in August. I'm going to share the video also with various organizations in hopes of promoting the beauty and natural awe of our island and our park. It will become a part of the Acadia 2016 Centennial Celebration as well. But there's a lot more to it than that. Yes, I do hope this video is useful to the park and our community, but it's also been extremely personally significant. Over the course of these 21,000 shots, I've learned a lot, and when working with Ned as well, I've become a much better photographer. But I've also spent hours and hours out in the park solo, and this has been a pretty moving experience. I've spent time just sort of reflecting on life. And I know that my dad got a lot of spirituality out in the park, and I definitely did too. Just watching some beautiful, beautiful things happen, like sunrises and sunsets and stars going by, and it's just been pretty magical. My very first shot of that morning on the precipice cliff, I wrote my college essay about that morning and what it meant to me, and how it's inspired me to really apply myself and work to protect the natural world and use all of my skills to do that. In addition, this project taught me a lot of lessons about bringing things to completion. As a very enthusiastic person, I start things all the time without ever finishing because I just get bogged down in the minutiae of things. But with this project, I had a lot of people involved that were really counting on me to finish this and make something impressive. And that put a lot of pressure on me. And I've really been able to, I hope, I've been able to complete this to the best of my ability. And that feels pretty cool, to have a finished product. Although I'm not completely done yet, I'm going to finish this project at the end of the summer once I get some more shots during the summertime. This brings me to my next steps. I'm going to continue shooting time lapses through the summer to get a full year of footage. I will then recompile the footage into another video using only the best shots, and I'll finally publish my work on Vimeo. And who knows where it's going to go from there. Personally, this project has given me a glimpse of what I'm capable of creating when I really pour everything I have into it. And I want to continue to do things like this for the rest of my life to inspire others to care about the natural world and to care about our beautiful park. Perhaps this kind of inspirational work will be one of my most important contributions of my skills and abilities for the betterment of the world. And who knows? Maybe I could even use my time-lapse skills as a source of income in the near future, or even as a basis for a future career in the long term. To wrap it up, I'd like to offer a sincere thanks to my family, especially my mom and grandfather for helping me purchase equipment and for supporting me along the way. I'd like to thank Mr. Lurvy for giving me just the nudge I needed to get going with this project, the Bar Harbor Chamber of Commerce, especially Jennifer Wright, for helping to purchase the slider, to Ned Johnston, my mentor, for the guidance and helpful advice, to Acadia National Park, especially Christy Anastasia and Christy Rugg, for their support and enthusiasm, to the EEF Grant Fund for financial assistance, and finally to you, Jack Sasner, for writing me the music for this film. And although this was an individual project, it took a village, and I'm so grateful to be part of a community where things like this can happen and come together. So thank you all for coming. Okay, now I present you the final product.
Anybody out there have a question for Will? Yes.
Were you running at 30 or 60 frames a second?
I ran 29.97.
All right.
30. I thought about running in 24, but I just rolled with 30. Good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey.
I noticed there was a lot of like interesting light stuff going on, and especially in the nighttime shots. You know, did you see anything, any strange phenomenon going on?
Not really. I will say though, I did see some excellent shooting stars. None of which you could really see because the shots that have them go by too quickly. But there were some really nice ones that I saw while I was out, especially those ones on Sand Beach. It's pretty incredible.
Anybody else? All right. Well, oh, what? Wait.
What was your favorite part about the entire process?
Ooh. Probably just being out in the park for just a really huge amount of time. I got to spend a lot of time just being there and reflecting, and that was really, really powerful and fun.
Good to go? Thank you very much.
Thanks.